Welcome to today's episode of Aiding Your Game, short web series where we discuss how to enhance your gaming to bring more engagement to your players as well as fun for yourself with less work. Today's subject is going to be a little controversial. There's a lot of discussion on it online, so I figured we'd address it in a big way, and it's all about consent in your games. So this one could be a hot one. Let's jump into it. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, today's subject will be possibly a little controversial, but I want to tackle it head on because it's gaining a lot of traction online with discussions going both ways. And that's really talking about consent in your game. So there are a number of people on both sides of the fence, extreme examples on both sides of the fence, and taking it back to that entry-level piece that we've been covering so far of just starting to, whether it's GM or get into playing role-playing games. As we've looked at the materials and started building a session, inviting people to build characters and dive into our immersive worlds. One of the big things we as GMs really have to think about is the type of story we're going to be telling and clearly communicating that out. So we focused a lot on how to start small and then grow from there. One of the key pieces we had was looking at single story adventures versus serial or a 20-year campaign. Again, with items like this, there should be a lot of forethought into how to make your story, the story that you want, that bite-sized piece. Because as we've talked about in this series, it's all about that beginning level, that starting piece. Where do we start to build into long-term campaigns? I think a lot of things that people don't think about or don't talk about in these hot topics is some of the dynamics of different groups. First GMs and first-time players versus groups who've been gaming for months, maybe years, maybe even decades. And there are dynamics that are very different in each of those different groups. The issues we're tackling really start with how do you start to become a GM, telling a good story, gathering a group of players, and creating an immersive world together. So I think the dynamic there is a lot different. Of course, as you're gathering your players, creating your story, getting that first adventure prepped and ready to run. Of course, one of the important things in communicating to gathering your players is what kind of story you're going to be telling. We covered that a little bit in an earlier video, but just to go over it again a little bit, the kind of theme or genre that you want to run, whether it's a sci-fi, whether it's a high fantasy, whether it's a gothic story, whether it's steampunk, whatever it is, you do have to spend a little bit of time thinking about that and then communicating that out to the players. Because as they are deciding whether or not they want to partake in your session and go through this adventure, the more information they have, the more educated decision they can make. So for instance, if you say, we're going to have a high campaign, and again, using examples we've used in previous videos, we're going to have a high fantasy campaign. First story is going to start out with an adventure to save a village. It sounds very easy. It sounds like this is something that anybody can approach, regardless of whether or not they have any fears or concerns about anything beyond that. They shouldn't, because we've really generalized what the story is about. Now, I caution DMs, if you are going to have more mature or adult themes in there, that's where you have to really have a little more discussion prior to that game session. One of the tricks I've used for years is, as I'm looking for players or replacing players who have, whether it's moved or lost interest in the game, whatever the case may be, is I give them kind of a synopsis of what the story world is like. And it doesn't have to be a fleshed out world. You don't have to have all the details. Don't hesitate to say, here's where I'm at and here's what it's going. We're starting in a small region. There's a village that's been plagued. It's up to the adventurers to find the source of whatever's been destroying the village or robbing from their merchants or carrying off people in the dead of night, whatever the case may be. Give those nuggets and go a little bit more in saying, I want to have the heroes be heroes, or I want the PCs to be the villains, whatever kind of scenario you want to run. And keep the mood really honest and sincere. If you do want to run more adult themes, this is the time to talk about it and say, I want to have adult themes. It's not really that hard. Some things should not be surprises to players when they go to a table and they sit down to play. They should have some bit of knowledge about what they're stepping into. And then for players as well, on the opposite side, if there are things that are red line pieces, as you're looking for a game, you need to be calling those out as well and saying, these are things that I'm not interested in having in a game at all that I'm playing. Because DMs can cater to hard and fast rules. Of course, they won't all the time. And depending on how your personalities and what you're wanting out of the game and what your hard lines are, it may be something where the player will not work with the group, or the group will not work with the GM, or the player may not work with the GM, and that's okay. Not every game is for everybody. The most important thing is good, strong, upfront communication. Now, with that, how much is acceptable? How much is too much? I've seen brochures. I've seen all different kinds of things. Of course, I'm not going to spew out all my opinions on everything, but I will give just my background and history as I'm forming a game and gathering players up after a move, for example. The first thing I want to do after I've kind of sent out my feelers and described the game world that I want to be running, and of course posting that I'm looking for players and approximately this many. As the people have come to show interest, I then start to question them a little bit and saying, what are you looking for out of a game? What is your availability? And what type of campaign are you looking at fitting in? Because I need this information as well to know, one, am I even going to appeal to them with my storytelling style, with the stories that I want to build and create with the players, with the game environment that I want to run? And there are times that I'm able to clearly tell right away that I'm not going to have this participant have any fun at my game because of whatever the reason may be. I'm not going to be able to offer that experience. And it's not fair to the player to be built up to think that he or she is going to get something that they're not. So you really have to do a lot of looking inside as well and deciding, maybe I'm not the right GM for this player. And again, that's okay. Because as long as we're all playing, as long as we're all having fun, and as long as we're all respectful to each other, it's a great opportunity for us to meet new people, create new stories with other people, stories that are interactive, that everybody can be a part of. and stories that over time can bring that bit of enjoyment to people who can look back with fond memories and say, remember when? Ultimately, that's what it's about. It's about creating those pieces of role-playing that with fond memories we can look back and say, I had a really good time doing that. This was a fantastic experience and I was part of it. Look at what we did over X amount of time. And that could be one session, could be a couple of months, could be a couple of years, and as mentioned, could be a couple of decades. So big issue, a lot of meat there. As I said, there are people on both sides of the fence. I'm hoping not to push anybody one way or the other. Just remind everybody that as adults in this industry, we have to be cognizant of each other and of ourselves. Of course, there are people with poor morals out there. They should not be indicative of everybody. Don't generalize. If you have a bad experience, don't hesitate to call it out, but don't let a bad experience weigh your entire judgment on all of the participants, the game, and the gaming world. Now that that big subject's out of the way, let's talk about something a little more lighthearted and fun. So, you've gotten your players, you've fielded them out, they've fielded you out, you've got a good starting story, you've got your bad guys, you've got some plot hooks to be able to take it to the next level, and your players hopefully are really engaged with the story and want to come back for the resolution to that hanging plot hook, and everybody's excited to play, and everybody comes to the table, but nobody's built a character. Nobody's ready to go. What do you do? Well, of course, some of this should be taken care of ahead of time as you're doing your planning and prepping for your game session. Hopefully your players are as well. And this is a good opportunity to, again, use some of that good communication skills to say, what are you interested in playing and how is it going to fit in my game world? Because there will be people who want to play all different kinds of things. The days of having to roll the dice at the table and come up with a race and class are pretty much gone unless you have an old school player and that's an edition that you're currently playing. For many of the new game systems, whether it be something like Dungeons and Dragons or Star Wars or many others, you can literally come to the table with an idea of what you want to play and create a character off of your imagination and ideas. So, as people are picking things, and again, we'll use Dungeons and Dragons as our primary example, there is so much information out there. All of the UA information, they can go to Reddit and find anything they want to play. A Warforged Tabaxi who is, both a paladin and a warlock, sure, why not? I'm sure that's out there on Reddit. But does it fit in your game? Well, first off, never say no. What you want to do is just get an idea. What do you want to play? How does that fit into what you've got for a backstory or your ideas? And then work with the player to tweak those ideas. If they want to play that Warforged Tabaxi Paladin Warlock, then it's going to take a little bit more because it's not as simple as just picking something out of the player's handbook at a first time or as a first time player would normally do. Even though this may be your first time DMing and you haven't really pulled in a lot of the elements or thought about a lot of the elements in the UA, how do you get that to work? Well, there are lots of mechanics and lots of opportunities to do that. And that's where, as GMs, you really get to flex your muscles on creativity. With that, using the example of the small farming village being plagued by the ogre, how do we get a Warforged Tabaxi paladin warlock into it. How does it fit in? Well, some of the easiest things to do is push back on the player a little bit and say, how did they become that Warforged Tabaxi, who's a paladin or warlock? If they want to play something that's a little more meaty than just your standard player's handbook classes and races, put the work back on them and make them say why they want to do it or how they got to be into the game world. And that type of creativity is going to do one of two things. It's going to allow them to come up with good solid ideas on who they are and where they came from, which is great because that's good material that you can use to interweave into your stories down the road. And two, it's going to give them a little bit of pause of, do I really want to play this or do I just want to get in and play? Either way is fine. If they can't come up with a good backstory or reasoning behind it and everything, that's where you do have to, kind of appeal to them and say, if that's what you want to play, we'll make it work. And then you will have to come up with some things that are going to be kind of broad and generalized and flesh them out with the player as you go along. And again, put a lot of that on the player because that's what they've chosen to do. It shouldn't be up to the GM alone to breathe life into that character. The easiest thing to do is use the old trope of you came from a faraway land and you're here looking for adventure. It's a great starting point, and really it can work with any character. If they don't have the time, the opportunity, the creativity to dive into that character development pre-game, it's a great way to at least get them to the table, rolling the dice and enjoying the session. Hopefully they love it and they want to do more. At this point, I've seen a couple of things happen. They start to invest more time and thought into their character, and it could be at different levels. Some of them may say, well, maybe I've got a brother or a sister, and tell me about them. That's where you have to go back and forth a little bit, creating some of that together. Sometimes they'll come back with even more thoughts on what they want for their backstory and why they're there and what their motivations are and how they came to be. And then on the other end of the spectrum, they could say, I had fun, but I want to try something else. Again, that's okay, because the whole point of role-playing games is collectively telling stories together. It's a group of people who are unfolding the impacts their characters have onto a fantasy world with the GM as a referee and guide, but ultimately it's about the character's story and their impact on the world. Don't hesitate to take some risks. Don't hesitate to know what your boundaries are, and don't hesitate to decide what those players should be responsible for and doing. Of course, you want to communicate heavily, get everybody on the same page, and then roll the dice and see what happens. Till next time, hope this was enjoyable, possibly enlightening. Hope you learned something from it. Next time, we're going to go back to some of the story and world building elements, have a little bit lighter session, but definitely an important topic I wanted to tackle. Until next time, always remember to ask, where will your adventures take you?